Perfect. So, hi everyone. I'm Chris from Oliver Bernard's, our recruitment company based in London. I specialise particularly in the DevOps and SRE space. And with me today, we've got Jon Barber, Senior DevOps Engineer, with what is a diverse background and extensive knowledge across the working technologies. Jon himself coming from a Java background prior to transitioning into DevOps. So, Jon, I'll pass over, let you do a little intro before we maybe pick your brain somewhat and get an idea for your background and perception of the industry.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been paid to work with computers for getting on for 30 years now. Kind of like when I graduated, I did a comp sci degree, and when I graduated at the time, the tech stack was kind of like more or less C and Unix.
Yep.
And then Java came along maybe 6 years down the line after that. So kind of like did Java for 15 odd years, and I really came of age as a developer with Java, so with OOP and all that kind of good stuff. And then more recently, I've been spending more and more time in the platform space the last 5 years or so, and initially just because it was interesting and it needed to be done, and more recently just because I think it's probably one of the most exciting areas in tech right now, and yeah, just lots of innovation going on there, and it's become really important. So yeah, that's where I'm right now.
Perfect, brilliant. And I guess that leads us on nicely to my first question. Relates to what DevOps means to you. I think a lot of businesses have different interpretations, different ideas of what it is. Obviously, based on some fundamental principles. But what does it mean to you, as an approach, as a way of working, and what made you actually want to, move across and transition into that originally?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It has become such an overloaded term, and it's yeah. Well, for me, I think the best definition I've seen is one come up with by Ken Mugridge, and I've got it here on the screen next to me because I wanted to get it right. And so reading it verbatim, it's a culture where people, regardless of title or background, work together to imagine, develop, deploy, and operate a system. And I think that's great because it's all around just building stuff together. It's all about, very much that kind of cross-functional good stuff that comes from when people collaborate well together. And ultimately, so that's a good definition. And I see DevOps really as kind of like the latest manifestation of like a line going back most recently to continuous delivery, and before that, Agile and XP and all that kind of stuff as well. And unfortunately, a lot of those terms have become almost trigger words for a lot of people because, again, they're falling into disuse. But I see at its core those principles, and it's like a movement. It's kind of like those principles just being built on, and we're learning more and more ourselves about how to do stuff. So for me, DevOps is all about that stuff. And the reason why it's become so important and it's so interesting is I think it's the major lever to help organizations compete effectively nowadays. There's that great work by Nicole Forsgren, Accelerate, and also they've done the State of DevOps reports, which are really, really good. Recommend if nobody's read them, highly recommend them because they're very digestible. But Nicole and the crew, they did a load of statistical analysis of practices, and we now have hard evidence that shows the practices that are advocated in DevOps really do make a difference to the bottom line of organizations and help them compete. And nowadays, if it's such a dog eat dog world, and DevOps approach is a way that helps orgs compete effectively and stay ahead.
No, perfect. I think one of the big things you said there, especially in terms of the approach, is obviously the collaborative effort, whereby in the past you might have had, separate teams at different ends of the life cycle. So, okay, can you do this? Can you do that? Now it's very much, right, let's meet up at the start of it, right, what we're going to do, how we're going to achieve it, and then sort of working together.
Hugely, I've been several times been into organizations to help them, and it's the classic, like you say, that originally the DevOps, the development and the ops. I mean, different incentivization, right? Often dev teams are incentivized to deliver new features. Ops are incentivized to keep the system stable. So there's this fundamental dichotomy there, right? Because different reporting structures, and they're not, you know, very out of sync, and that's a problem.
Yeah. And did you find beforehand, perhaps before DevOps was as big as it is now, that the two just might clash quite a bit, and that was obviously the reason for businesses, you know, falling behind?
Hugely. I mean, we've been in meetings where it was almost, you could almost, if you'd written it as a drama, people would think it was unbelievable, but you could see the ops guys, and you can understand why as well, because these guys had been given a real hard time when systems went down, you know, because we're talking lots of money been lost. So they've been beaten into the ground really and told, you know, keep things running. And you could see, you know, I've been in meetings where there've been the dev team and the ops team's just absolutely saying, we are not going to put that into production because, you know, we're scared, frankly. And so it's those human factors, and you can completely see why, right? So that's one of the findings from the Accelerate work, from Nicole's work, is that fundamentally what you need is leadership. You need a leadership that says, no, we're going to change these silos, you know, and be a bit brave, but obviously evidence-based, all that good stuff, and change those aspects, because it's all about the people at the end of the day.
Yeah. No, perfect. I think it's really good, obviously, oversight and sort of idea of where it's started to where it is now. So where we are now, I mean, what would you say is, you know, your favourite, maybe one or two technologies to use at present? I think we've seen a large growth in Kubernetes in particular as one of the things that, like you say, everyone's using, and businesses that aren't seem to be, you know, falling behind. So what would you say is, you know, personally your favourites to use, and what would be the, you know, applications of those?
That's a really interesting point. I was talking about this the other day with some colleagues, and it seems at the moment in the, you know, the cloud native space, cloud native, another term that kind of is a bit nebulous, but, you know, I think we know what we mean by it. But in the cloud native space at the moment, we've almost got two streams. We've got like the Kubernetes stream and the kind of, the way that's going. And that there, I'd say, you could say that's almost like for development teams, that's kind of like a low impact change. By that, I mean, if you're writing code that conforms with the 12-factor app approach, which has been around for, you know, since early 2000s, then moving to Kubernetes generally isn't too painful. So you can still more or less write software the same way you've been writing it, with a couple of tweaks. The other stream is the whole move to serverless, which is very interesting, and that needs a radical way of change of how you write software. You cannot write software the way you used to. You know, it's all very much, you've got to buy into the serverless way of thinking. So you've got those two streams going on there. I've got to say, I've spent most of my time in the Kubernetes stream, but I'm really, really interested in the serverless stream, because it might sound odd, but I'd, as much as I like writing Terraform and looking after Kubernetes clusters and all that good stuff, I'd also love never have to do it again. So going back to like that, why is DevOps so important? It's about making orgs agile and able to change quickly and get business value out there quickly. And done badly, the Kubernetes setup and all that kind of business, you can end up heaping complexity on there, more and more complexity. And I think it's quite hard not to get caught up in that. So of the two streams, I'm more interested in the serverless, and just getting rid, trying to, wherever possible, let that, you know, move more and more to SaaS setup, kind of like, you know, less stuff as yourself. And what that means is similar to the conversations we had as an industry around QA maybe 10 years ago, where I think a lot of QA engineers were very nervous around test automation, saying, you know, what does that mean for my job if all that goes away? And if anything, what that meant was we could make jobs more enjoyable, because then the value you bring as a human is all around the more value-adding work, which is around exploration. Similar with serverless, right? If you can get rid of like the day-to-day feeding and running of Kubernetes clusters, but then you can help looking at things like observability, deployment, how to help teams become more and more effective.
Yeah.
Which I think done well is how DevOps brings the value. It helps create those mythical 10 times developers by taking your existing developers and just helping them do their job in a better way. And
Yeah.
so, you know, that for me, the serverless area is very, very interesting.
Yeah. Perfect. No, appreciate the insight there. And by the sounds of things, that route could maybe sort of quote unquote trim things in places so that we can actually look at the wider approach as such, and how you can improve on it from perhaps the outside looking in rather than inside looking out.
Hugely.
Perfect. Brilliant. So yeah, obviously my next question is something that myself as a recruiter particularly, and my colleagues particularly in the DevOps space have seen an influx in maybe sort of the last couple of years, is the sort of need for maybe people from a software engineering background or development background such as yourself, opposed to just maybe some of the sort of systems, sysadmin Linux guys that are looking to sort of transition across. Which obviously those generally speaking are the sort of two backgrounds, obviously as the name DevOps suggests. So I guess for myself, I just wanted to get an insight as to perhaps why you think that might be. You know, is it something to do with the fundamental software engineering principles? Why do you think that helped you perhaps transition across into DevOps from development? And I guess what your advice might be in that respect to maybe people that are developers now, maybe junior, mid-level developers that might look to move across into DevOps.
So I think that's a great question. I think the things I brought across, and again, there's no kind of like, and I'm sure this is in the question anyway, but there's no either or. You get people from a sysadmin background who have these skills as well, but they're more prevalent in the software engineering space.
Yeah.
I think a big one is around testing. So as we move more and more to infrastructure as code, so with Terraform, well, what's interesting is as you move up that stack more and more recently, I found I've done less and less, say, infrastructure as code, moving more and more to like software as a service. So less Terraform and moving more towards Kubernetes and all that kind of stuff. We're moving higher and higher up the software, infrastructure as software. So, Terraform obviously is code in a form, which needs testing, but definitely moving more and more into Kubernetes. The stuff we're doing is getting more and more sophisticated. We're leveraging the abilities more and more and relying on it more and more. And for that, for me, testing is a big part of making that more reliable. So the practices we do from continuous delivery, for example, which is all around fast feedback loops and making sure that the code we write can be deployed at any time. We can apply those into this space, i.e., basically say if you write a Terraform module, having tests for that, all that kind of approach and making that in from the very beginning and also kind of trying to think how can we detect when things have gone wrong. And that's all around, general basic writing tests, all that kind of approach, that kind of test-driven development, although that's another conversation I was having recently as well. Sadly, I think, strictly speaking, test-driven development you can't do in the infrastructure space for various reasons, but you can definitely do work out how you can put testing in there as a first-class concern. And especially around observability, all those, like we were saying before, bringing the value add. As we move higher and higher up that stack, I think you're getting more and more into writing code to get the value add out of that. So I think that's a big movement at the moment, and that's also Google. The material that's come out of Google recently around SRE. I believe that's Google's definition of SRE is bringing software development principles to operating. So basically, writing stuff in code. And the other thing I think which is really promising as well is we're seeing more and more as we move up that stack. Say, for example, in Kubernetes, we've got the operators approach, which is a relatively new approach, but that's really nice. Being able to encode behavior we want to see as code means you can test it, deploy it, and it takes a lot of that manual error-prone stuff away and leverage things like Kubernetes. The continual inspect and reconcile loop is really valuable. So being able to leverage all the abilities to write that in code is extremely powerful, I think.
Yeah.
And what I'd say is advice to people coming up, for developers who are interested in this, I'd say just do it, because because the reason I got involved originally was I was just really interested in kind of like, okay, I can remember originally it was around load balancers in Amazon. So how does that work? How do we make our software more available and better, you know? And
Yeah.
I think it's go with that interest if you've got it, because even if you don't end up doing much in the platform space, it will make you a better engineer. Understanding how this stuff works will make you a better engineer.
Yeah.
And also what I'd say to people coming from more traditional admin background, sysadmin background, that I think one of the good things more recently is there's a lot of demystifying of software development being a special thing. It isn't, it's a skill.
Yeah.
Anybody can learn it. Don't feel off-put if you haven't got a computing science background or any of that stuff. It's a skill, you can learn it. We'll all get better at this stuff. So I think that for both camps, I guess what I'm saying in a very long-winded way is keep that growth mindset. You can learn this stuff and it will make you a better engineer, whether it's from sysadmin side or development side. Just follow your interests.
Perfect. Brilliant. And yeah, I guess as you mentioned there in the first instance, I guess the key fundamental there is that you'll be able to put those practices in place and sort of pick up errors along the way or anything that might be wrong. I guess is the time saving element. You know, if you can do all of those, go bit by bit through every single one of those procedures, then I guess you can save time and I guess businesses will save money at the same time. And everything that goes into production is already, I guess, developed and tested.
Good, yeah. So a concrete example of the last gig I just did, they'd adopted GitOps, Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So when we helped them originally, what they had is they had a pipeline where they packaged up their deployment, went all the way through to Kubernetes, deployed it. So the pipeline was green, but it never actually went live in the cluster. And I'm not joking, we spent about an hour working out what had happened. And in the end, it was because there was a annotation missing from the deployment.
Yeah.
So you think of all that time, that was like hours kind of wasted, right? So what we did, sat down with the team, went back in the pipeline up to the point where the Helm chart was being created. And in the pipeline, we could put a little test in there to make sure that annotation was in there. And that was detected like within a commit to the Helm chart. And that took maybe a minute for that problem to be encountered. So, you know, that we were reducing from like hours down to like minutes to find that problem. So that's a really good concrete example of exactly that, the feedback loops. And we did that in code. So it's a nice example.
Yeah, no, good to sort of get an example in practice there and shed some light on it, like you say. I guess a couple of sort of final wrap-ups. I guess we've covered most sort of bases there of your background, interests, etc. What you think of the industry, and I guess one big thing is maybe what might be coming up. Obviously, we've discussed how it's developed from its inception and the sort of theory behind DevOps. At the sort of fundamental technology level, beyond the sort of DevOps practices, what do you think might be the next big thing or something to watch, or maybe a technology that you see growing and being adopted quite heavily by more and more businesses, in the next sort of couple of years?
I think it definitely, I think serverless. I think that is going to become such a, I think it's just the benefits are going to be quite something. And the one thing that really caught my eye recently, kind of like almost like this is serverless disappearing even more into the fabric of things, is the Lucet stuff that Fastly is doing, which is all around running WebAssembly on their edge network, which is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, being able to kind of move what was running in the browser onto their edge network in a serverless, that's got some really interesting possibilities behind it. I mean, it's really early days. We'll have to see what happens, but that's really quite exciting, for example.
Yeah, you could see that grow quite extensively then over the next sort of 2-3 years or so.
I think so. I think function as just as a compute facility that you can basically just fire and forget is quite something.
Yeah, Perfect, brilliant. And I guess one thing I did want to pick your brain on particularly, obviously quite topical at the minute, with everyone being work from home, obviously varying companies have different policies. Everyone needs to be on site. Some people are, some companies are a bit more flexible. Sometimes it's a case by case basis. So I guess obviously we're all learning now, whether or not by choice or the fact that we're forced to. We are all learning, and companies are obviously adopting new measures. I guess myself, I just wanted to ask you, in the past, how have you found working from home, different team members? Have you found it really impacts projects much? Can efficiency, productivity still be the same? And perhaps where you see, the current circumstances now and events, how that might impact the sort of landscape of remote working and work from home further down the line?
That's a really interesting question. It can work really well, but there's so many factors to take into account, though. One of which we touched on earlier, of course, is culture of your company.
Yep.
If it's the level of trust in the company, but also there's all other factors, human factors as well. Whereas there's no two ways around it. Being face to face with somebody in the same room often is the better way to go, because all the bandwidth to do with non-verbal communication, so important, and getting that empathy going on. However, having said that, balancing with other benefits of remote work and working from home, it can work, and you get other benefits as well. So I've seen it work well, where there's some things where it has worked well is where there was already a fairly good culture of pairing or of knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
And also the other interesting aspect of it as well is that you've got to be a bit more deliberate about it as well. So in some ways that's a benefit. If you're co-located in the same space, you can do things on an ad hoc basis that can work well. But when you're remote, you've got to put a little bit more thought into a bit more planning, which can bring benefits as well. Also, other things that I've seen work well as well is when companies have, or organizations have, explicitly factored into things like the non-working dynamic. So for example, a big aspect of being in the office is the social dynamic and all that great stuff you get from that. So just the simple things such as like having a Slack channel where the whole purpose of that channel is just to talk non-work stuff, and being honest and say, this is what humans do, and it's fine to be in this channel and talk rubbish. Nobody's going to say, why aren't you, hunched over your keyboard cranking out code? But it's a complex one, and but I think it can work, and I think it is going to make it. I think things are going to change quite a bit on the back of this. I think remote work will become more and more dynamic. But we'll have to see. Yeah,
perfect. I guess quite ironically, probably reflects the start of the conversation around DevOps. The focus is wholly on how people interact, level of collaboration, and sort of how they alter that dynamic really and make it work.
Absolutely.
I guess it's something that obviously everyone is talking about at the moment, and something that we could see change quite heavily, further down the line, maybe 6 months, a year, however long this lasts for. So it was good to sort of get your insight there based off your experiences. I think that's everything. Really appreciate your time and obviously the insights there. Good to sort of pick your brain and get an idea for your interpretation of the industry and the technologies used.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Cheers, John. Thanks for that.
Chris.